Hi and welcome back. Today I wanted to talk to you about my feelings and thoughts towards the episodic content that we have gotten within Destiny lately, specifically throughout this last year. I know we're only having this 1 year with sort of the episodes, but I wanted to talk about why I feel like it's been so weak, where it failed, where it didn't live up to the expectations, and all of these sort of things. So let's dive right into it. Now, what is an episode? Well, the promise of an episode was that it was going to be a more narrative-focused season. It was going to abridge the part between the next major expansion. You know, it was going to be the thing we had between the final shape and whatever was next, which we now know as Edge of Fate. And it did do that, albeit I would say to a questionable degree. Because you see, Echoes launched the very first episode doing Final Shape, and it was very mediocre. It was more battlegrounds, it was more for everything that we were used to, and it wasn't really that much fun to play. Not just because I dislike craftable guns, which I do and I don't mind admitting that, but I also just think in general the content was just not that great. It did have craftable guns, and while I found it not as enjoyable as some other people did, I will admit the loot was kind of great. I love the way that these guns look, the Vex style on them. All of that was really cool. My issue here is primarily with the content and the story. The story focusing around this conductor type of fella who had gained one of their artifacts that could control the Vex now by putting a little color around them. I found it all kind of cheesy, and the ending cutscene was even worse. And I'm not going to spoil it, I'm just going to say, in my opinion, that was bad. And the story itself, really, in my opinion, wasn't the highlight. The loot definitely was, and the fact that it came out alongside the final shape was. The content, like I said, is battlegrounds primarily, but then you had the Breach executables, which held old gear from Season 9, things like Breach Light and all of those sort of guns. You have March's Retribution coming back. It was all great. It was pretty alright. The loot was alright. It wasn't anything to write home about. The craftables was kind of good. The rocket assisted sidearm was really fucking good. And I think a sleeper pick, in my opinion, is the scout rifle from that season. My god, that yeehaw feel of that thing is really there. I love that. Very, very cool gun. Then we moved on to Revenant. Revenant was sort of the first standalone episode. I had expected things to get good here. This was where Bungie was supposed to pick up the slack, you know? We had Final Shape, fair enough. The episode there was going to be kind of mid, but the next one, that one had to hit hard. So Revenant launched, and we had a few things to immediately get into. We have Vesper's Host, and that was like all of its own experience, and it was a great dungeon, which you would probably have to unlock by the dungeon key if you purchased them individually, which, in my opinion, isn't a great system at all. I don't like the dungeon keys, but that's besides the point. The episode itself was very, very mid to bad, in my opinion. Revenant lost me complete. And it was a few reasons for it. For one, the guns, in my opinion, were generally mediocre, immediately beaten out by the dungeon guns, which is a great thing. I do think that there should be, some better loot in the dungeon. But my god, putting the very best DPS weapon in there and then RNG weighing it so there's a less likely chance that you get it was kind of a weird move, in my opinion. But I feel like the sort of content in the episode was really the reason why I just couldn't vibe with it. It was essentially a revamped version of Onslaught, which in my opinion was actually very good. The revamped version of Onslaught, and when I say revamp, I use that word very loosely, essentially it was just more upgrades. So now you can purchase an airstrike and a turret, and the mines now has the stasis effect. It was alright. It was completely fine. It's more Onslaught, and Onslaught is fun. The issue is that Bungie removed the one most notable element of Onslaught, period. That being that in Onslaught, the old Onslaught, the good old Onslaught, you would farm for shinies. Here you have masterwork guns, but they looked similar. There was no sort of change in visuals or anything like that. And crucially, you weren't guaranteed one by the end of a run. Granted that you got quite a few of them from the time that I've spent with the episode, but that was sort of the entire thing for it. It really did not work out, and I hope that in future iterations of Onslaught, that instead of having these sort of random rewards, then give me the highest tier possible loot for completing the run. Incentivize me to stick around, because otherwise the way people will do these things is by running wave 10s up until they've gotten the stuff that they want. Now, we did get another piece of content throughout this entire sort of episode. We got Tomb of Elders. To my fathers is probably the content this year I've interacted the least with. It was a mild boss rush mode. Well, boss rush is kind of loosely used as well. It was more of your gauntlet mode. It reminded me quite a bit of Menagerie from what I did touch of it. It's alright. It was decent fun. It wasn't anything to write home about at all, in my opinion. And lastly, we had the story. The story, in my opinion, actually was kind of alright. It featured Ido. I like Ido quite a lot, actually. I think the Fallen storyline is usually kind of interesting. And Mithrax having fallen sick, and Ido brewing your black alley fucking drugs here to feed to him to hope that he'll get better. It was great. You run around, collect ingredients, and then you feed it to him. One of the main pieces of feedback I got when I talked about this episode on a video was that you don't really have to interact with the content. But that isn't an excuse for the content to be bad, because there was another system, there was the tonic system, which allowed you to put on a potion, and then you can get the seasonal loot by just playing whatever. That is a good system. More of that. I think the brewing, while it was way too heavily RNG weight, it is definitely not a bad system. I like the fact that I didn't necessarily have to interact with the content that I disliked, while I could still get the rewards. Lastly, we have the current episode, that being Heresy. Heresy drew me back in. It was about the Hive Guards. You see, the Hive Guards have gotten the relic. They gotten one of the relics of the travel, and they're bringing back Oryx. I talked about the story just yesterday for me now. It was pretty alright. It was nothing to write home about at all, in my opinion. And I feel like the way that they brought back Eris right after she died was kind of silly, mainly because it removed all the tension almost immediately. But overall, I like this episode quite a lot. You see, the Nether is a really cool activity that I hope to see more iterations of. They removed your health regen, now you have constant attrition, but they also gave you 20 million health. So you had this sort of offset. And I love the fact that it would be a piece of content where I'd actually run around and look through different stuff, open chest, explore the area, to then go down and fight a boss. That was pretty cool. And I really like that this sort of boss killing thing could actually earn me a real shiny, not the fake shiny, mind you, a completely different shader and everything like that. Was prettifying them, and I like being prettified. So, that is all pretty great. The main issues that I had with the Nether is that there are too many different versions of the same weapon, being that you have your normal variant, then you have your normal shiny variant, then you have your adept variant, and then you have your adept shiny. And I hear you say to me, but chicken, that's not an issue, because you just play expert to get your, fucking adepts. And I would have agreed with you if it wasn't just a random chance of you getting an adept on an expert run. Granted that the chance was kind of high, but you could just as well get your completely normal average ass guns on your sort of expert runs. And that I didn't really not like. And I still don't like the fact that you don't get a guaranteed shiny by the end of a run, as it has again incentivized people to run the very first room of the Nether and then quit out and load in again and quit out and load in again on repeat. And I'm sorry, but that's just kind of boring. I really do want a meta that incentivizes you to run through it. I love the ideas of shinies and I love all of these sort of things, but there needs to be a proper old incentive to actually play through the entire piece of content, as it isn't something you just do. It's like an hour's commitment, albeit you can of course speed that up, but like I'd say the average-ish amount would be like one of those larger pieces of content, an hour-ish. So I'd say guaranteeing people a drop of a shiny isn't really feeding them either. So we had that. Then we also had one other big piece of content, that being Court of Blades. Court of Blades is your boss rush mode. I kinda don't like it as much, mainly due to some of the encounters being a little bit annoying and it having a lot of reused mechanics, but it is what you can expect. It felt much more like your usual seasonal content. It was alright, nothing there. And we had another exotic mission, that being the one for Borrowed Diet, which was also really cool. So, as I have lined out here, there isn't really content-wise any difference. So, like, if you look at an episode, there isn't anything different from that to a season. What did you get in a season? Where you get your piece of content, where you get your exotic quest. Sometimes you get 2 pieces of content when they were really spicy. In the episode, you just got 2 pieces of content guaranteed. It was not really worth the switch over, and I think a lot of people, including myself, expected the episodic system to sort of entirely deal away with a lot of the issues that we had. Innovation, We wanted it to be different, and it just wasn't. It was more of the same, but more crucially, it wasn't more of the same in the one way that mattered, which is it did not bridge a good story point to Edge of Fate. Edge of Fate is gonna be about the Nine in some way. You know, fucking the Nine lady, the emissary, quitting her job. Or they quit their job, I'm not sure what they identify as. But like they quit a job and we have to find out what the fuck is going on, what does that even mean, all of these sort of things. And it sounds pretty interesting. I like the Nine a lot. And the main thing about it is that the story has not at all led up to it. It feels like starting next week when Edge of Fate comes out, it's going to be a completely new storyline. You could have missed out on all the episodes and you wouldn't have missed out at all. And that's a bit of a fucking shame. Because throughout at least the other expansions, you could see a little lead up towards the sort of big expansion, the big reveal. That wasn't here, which is also meant that there isn't a lot of hype behind it. There's a lot of people who are like, what's going on in the story? Because there is no fucking story to be told. They're all singular episodes. They are the OVA of anime. And it is a shame to see that when there is potential for there to be so much more to lead up into this expansion experience. I think that is the crucial takeaway from these episodes as well. It's not that the content necessarily was bad. It was just so fucking mediocre. People left because nobody really cares. We want something new, we want innovation, and we didn't get it with the episodic system. So it begs the question, why do they need to exist? This was, in my opinion, not a great idea to start out with. I would have much preferred the system that we are going to go into, where we instead just get 2 big expansions or medium-sized expansions, where there is actual innovation and chance for change. Because Destiny needs desperately to change. And going into this sort of expansion, we do have a Rite of the Nine, and there has been some lore and story tidbits there. But the fact that that wasn't a part of the season, like there wasn't a seasonal thing, or an episodic thing, sorry, in my opinion, is a bit of a shame. And the reason that that is a shame is that there hasn't been a big sort of exclamation point for the story where you end up in this last big moment of something happening. That didn't really happen. This wasn't your final shape, you know, your Lightfall to final shape, or even better, your Witch Queen to Lightfall, where you have this sort of big expectations of going into the story. Here we are starting on a fresh one, it feels like. And I'm genuinely looking forward to see what we have to offer here in Age of Fate. But we'll have to see that. Anyway, I've lined out the content now. So now that you know exactly what a Destiny 2 episode is in detail, we can talk about whether or not they were successful. Did they innovate? I wouldn't say so necessarily. Does that mean that they're bad? No. I want to make the crucial distinction when I call about this, when I sort of have a conversation about this. These are my opinions. You do not have to agree with me. I don't think you have to sit here and agree that I think the fucking Onslaught Salvation is bad. If you love that, then that's great. Hell yeah, more of that. But for me, that just, it didn't scratch that itch. And more so, the loot hasn't scratched that itch. And I think that's a bit of a shame. It's a real shame. It's a darn shame even. And that is mainly because, in the case of Salvation, like Onslaught Salvation, there wasn't really any sort of shinies there at all, and they were immediately outclassed by the dungeon loot, which, in my opinion, is fair enough. It's a dungeon after all. But I think this has sort of been a recurring thing where most of the weapons have just felt useless. And with the lack of an ability in Heresy and that sort of thing, to at least do some level of target farming, or maybe not even target farming, but get a little bit more lucky on those shinies, it has felt like there hasn't been a direct path to progression. And more so than that, I think the lack of story and the lack of any sort of direct path into Age of Fate has led to, in my opinion, the episodes kind of falling flat. And it's not something new that the season or the in-between content isn't great. But it is something new that it's so genuinely awful, at least for me, that I have sort of just stopped caring. And that is to say that I had a point in Heresy, and it's one of the reasons why I didn't talk a lot about Destiny at all, was when I sort of almost quit the game, or I'll stop playing. I don't like the word quit because it seems like this is like my full-time job. It isn't. I sort of just stopped playing for like a few months because the game felt like it was kind of stagnating. And that has been an issue for a while. It's just that there wasn't a narrative hook to tie me back in. There wasn't a reason for me to come back. But we'll see how things go in Age of Fate. Now, there's more to discuss when it comes to Destiny 2, when it comes to the episode. Specifically, there was one thing that was supposed to bridge us from the episodes to the Age of Fate. That being Rite of the Nine. Rite of the Nine is basically a event that sort of features very much like Into the Light, a few dungeons with some revamped loot, some more reasons to go through it, a bunch of revamped mechanics, a new title, all of that sort of stuff. It was very much marketed as being this year's Into the Light. And Into the Light was an extremely well-received experience. I think it bridged the gap of content from the previous season to Final Shape incredibly well with Pantheon and with Onslaught. So what did Rite of the Nine do? Well, in Rite of the Nine, we have a few dungeons. We have 3 specifically, that being Spire the Watcher, Ghost of the Deep, and Prophecy, that got revamped loot, revamped mechanics, and this really cool fucking looking shiny variant to their weapons. So, why has this event not been perceived as well? Well, almost immediately off the bat, you can see that there is no Onslaught variation here. That is completely gone. There's no new sort of big thing here to keep you invested, a new game mode or anything like that for people who might be a little bit more casual to delve into. The idea being that you will probably be delving into the story mode dungeons, as now the dungeons have difficulty options. And not just between normal and master, but they actually have the story mode, which is what you're watching right now. Then they have a normal mode, and then they have the sort of ultimatum being the very hardest variant. And I really like these dungeons. I think they're designed in a really cool way, with most of the content feeling really well. The one major problem that I have with them in terms of actually playing being that attrition on ultimatum is such a pain in the ass. But other than that, I think the dungeons are really fun. The issue and the reason why you've seen a lot of people probably not play this event as much as they did with Into the Light is that the weapon rolls are very incredibly mid. And when I say mid, I mean there are maybe 2 guns you could argue for here. You can make it 3 if you really want to be generous here. But in general, the very biggest things that you want is, if you don't have a Heresy Vengeance, Cold Comfort, Envious, Elemental Honing, or BNS, that is pretty good. But you can also get No Survivors with Heal Clip and Incandescent, which is also an incredible SMG. And you can get it with that sexy fucking ornament on, I'm telling you. And that is sort of the 2 biggest draws for me that I wanted. But you can also get a shotgun with both Trench Barrel and 1-2 Punch, which is a legitimately interesting combination in a sudden death from Prophecy. And that is about all the weapons that are really, in my opinion, worth going for. Most of these are very niche uses, and maybe if you like them, then of course they're gonna be worth farming for. But other than that, not really. And that's a bit of the shame. Because you see, with Into the Light, almost every single gun was in some way meta-defining. You had your Edge Transit, the DPS meta at the time. Then you had your Succession, which was a revamped version of Succession for those who didn't have it. And even that could have things like Discord and Redirection that could do some fun small things. And then you had Luna's Howl. With Incandescent and Heal Clip, you had Recluse, which had Mountaintop. Oh! And on top of that, you had Elsie's Rifle and a bunch of others that were kind of good for PvP too. So you had a bunch of choices in weapons here with Into the Light. Unfortunately, that was not the case with Rite of the Nine, as there hasn't really been a lot of talk and buzzing around all of these different weapons, as there are a few that are kind of worth getting, and then there's a bunch that just aren't. And I think that's a bit of a shame, because Rite of the Nine, in my opinion, had even more potential than the Pantheon and Into the Light did. Because you see, Into the Light also had Pantheon, which was essentially a boss rush raid gauntlet. And it was probably one of the most fun pieces of content I've ever played. Basically, they would assort a set of raid encounters that would release week over week, and you'd have to complete them, and then the rank ramp up as you go. You get adept raid loot from them. While that isn't revamped loot, I still thought it was pretty cool. I thought it was a nifty little idea, and a great way to reuse content in a more challenging way that, in my opinion, was really cool. And those raid encounters would also have different mechanics and so on. Really fucking cool stuff. And Rite of the Nine does a lot of the same thing. And I think, like I said, it has even more potential as it is a dungeon thing. And here with dungeons, the big difference is that 3 people can go in. So you don't even need, if you're too shy for a raid team, you can go and complete your solo if you want to. But to play the harder versions, you only needed to get 2 other people. That is much more doable than 6. And I think that is a pretty cool sort of jumping off point, because it gave people an opportunity to go in and experience content that they might not have before, and more so that it gave them an opportunity to maybe get some harder content in that they usually would. And I think this was all pretty cool. Unfortunately, it was almost immediately ruined by the lack of incentive other than the title to play, because like I said, the weapons are mid to bad. And that is really unfortunate, because right now we are at a point where people aren't exactly super hyped for Edge of Fate. And it has left us in a position where having something that could bridge the gap between now and Edge of Fate would have been a real good opportunity to get people a little bit into it. There's of course more to it than that, as the Into the Light weapons were already enhanceable. Like when you entered the new expansion, you knew you could enhance them. But now we're getting tiered loot. And it might not necessarily mean that your Rite of the Nine weapons will immediately fall off. But it can feel a little bit weird bothering with grinding for weapons when there's a chance they'll immediately get outclassed. And not just because there's a different meta and the weapons are better, but because the new weapons, they get a inherent buff for being new, along with the fact that there's this new tiering system of like tier 5 and 3 loot and all that stuff. And the fact of the matter is that you don't get a tier variant of these weapons, of the Rite of the Nine weapons. It would have been an easy slam dunk on the community, easy goodwill, to just give a tiered version of the Rite of the Nine weapons. It would have been fucking free. It would have been a free win. And the worst part is, Bungie used to do this sort of thing. If you all remember back to the old days of Forsaken, there used to be, right before Forsaken launched, a few places you could get randomly rolled gear. And it didn't matter if it was good gear, but the fact that there was something new that was coming into the game and it was mine before the release, that was enough. And on top of that, and another example of it was right before Black Armory, Bungie would do it again, where these sort of Black Armory dudes would spawn a little bit around the place and you could kill them to get some Black Armory weapons. And it was so fucking cool, because it was the upcoming content, like gear, that you would be getting there. And unfortunately, Bungie didn't really do that here. And it was an easy opportunity to do it. I also think the narrative overall has just not really been going very well, with Heresy ending, and then there was this weird cutscene you can get in Rite of the Nine that led to nothing. It all felt a little bit strange. And that leads us to the end of the event here, where people are not exactly super positive, but not super negative. I think a lot of people view it as better than nothing. And I agree with that, because we did get Heavy Metal. Heavy Metal being a PvP game mode where you play as either tanks or mechs and then you just duke it out. It's pretty fun. It's pretty fun having running around in your tank in PvP, then coming up against a guy in a Drake, and like he'll like be running around in his break, like boom, 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 and then he'll shoot you and you'll shoot him, and it's kind of silly. It's just silly good fun. And I really did enjoy that game mode, despite the fact that it probably did piss off a few people, and there's probably a lot of people who might not like it as much. I just thought it was a cute little thing to include. I thought it was really fun. And same thing can be said about Rite of the Nine. I really enjoyed the event itself. I just wish the loot and the incentive to play had been a little bit stronger. Again, cheering the loot, just teasing the new things to come would have been nice. Or alternatively, completely revamp your fucking weapons. Half of them look super similar to what there was before. And that's just a bit of a shame. You could have completely revamped a lot of these guns, like from the bottom up. And I think a lot of people would have probably liked it a little bit more. Like, sure, give some completely busted combos on them. Make a judgment with like kill clip and multi-kill clip or something. Like, do something crazy and out there. I don't think anybody would have like minded that a whole lot. But instead of doing that, we got this kind of a little bit mid-event. And it's not that it's bad, it's just that in comparison to Into the Light, which it was directly compared to, it lacked a lot. It lacked the game mode, it lacked some more non-dungeon mechanic things, like you had Heavy Metal here, which I suppose you could include as being a game mode, just like Onslaught used to be. But I'd argue Onslaught was way, way, way bigger in scope and everything else. And with Rite of the Nine, we just did not get anything like that. And that's a bit of a shame. Because Onslaught had the opportunity to just have me go in by myself, farm for a bit, then drop out and wait for the boys for Pantheon. Here, to play an Ultimatum, I usually do wait for my boys to jump on so we can play some Ultimatum dungeons, or when we decide to do that, which isn't often, as most of the loot just did not really feel worth it to grind. But we'll see going into the future. We already know there's gonna be something at the end of Age of Fate. We'll see how it goes. I am definitely looking forward to everything, and like I said, it's not that Rite of the Nine is a bad event. It is not. Having something now is way better than the alternative of not having anything here now. And Rite of the Nine is really fun. I love the entire story mode of the dungeon, where not only just can you go through it way faster, but on top of that, there's nice tooltip hints and everything for new people to get a chance to go through the dungeon for the first time. I think it's really cool, and I think it's really nice to see. And I hope Bungie does way more of this. Use tooltips in these ways. This is what we want. This is what we need to get new players into the game. But with that being said, that has been it for this time. I hope you enjoyed this video and my discussion and thoughts of Rite of the Nine. I think Rite of the Nine has been a mild success in the sense that it was not bad, it wasn't awful, and it's definitely given me something to do from time to time. But other than that, I don't have much to say about it, other than I think it's very, very alright. But I hope you enjoyed this video regardless. I hope you have a wonderful day ahead of you, and if you do, and if you like the video, do the YouTube stuff, and otherwise I'll see you in the next one. Bye.